Hey there, and welcome into another episode of the Route 1 Rundown, the place for you if you eat, breathe, sleep, and live Maryland men's basketball. I'm your host, Steve Gorgie, and I'm excited to be back for another episode as I break down the Terps' season-opening victory, 79-49 over the Manhattan Jaspers. And where else can I start with this episode other than Derik freaking Queen? The co-MVP of the McDonald's All-American game showed exactly why he was that. DQ had the Jaspers in the Blizzard machine as he put up 22 points, 20 boards in his Terps debut, the first freshman to ever put up 20 and 20 in a game, and he does it in his very first one. That was the story of the game. That's what has had everybody buzzing this week when they think about Maryland, when they talk about Derik Queen, and this is exactly what you were hoping to see if you're a Terps fan. He is a huge reason for optimism with this team this year. So what did we see from Queen in this game? Well, we saw he had a tremendous motor. He was all over the place. That was very evident on the offensive glass, rebounding in general. We saw that he is great at positioning himself, getting position in the low post. He has some low post moves. Now, make no mistake about it, right? Manhattan is not a Big Ten front line. For most of the night, they had a guy on him who was like 6'7", 6'8". At one point, they brought in their 7-footer just for a few minutes. But it's not a Big Ten front line. It's not the caliber of competition that you will expect to see him go up against the rest of the season. But in his very first game, against what was put in front of him, he dominated. So I was impressed with the way he's able to get position in the low post. But beyond that, we saw ball handling from Queen. There was one sequence, I think it was early in the second half, maybe late in the first half. No, I think it was late in the first half. I can't remember. I can't remember exactly when it was. Yeah, it was late in the first half here, about 6 minutes to go. Queen gets a rebound. He brings the ball up just short of midcourt. And he finds Julian Reese, his front court mate, for a layup. And it was a nice job running the court by Julian Reese, too. But that's something that differentiates Derik Queen. It's not that just he's your plodding big man. It's he has some real skill to his game, too. And he's going to need both. Both together are what's going to make him exceptional and what has everybody so excited. But it's not just the fact that he has those low post moves, that he's great doing the fundamentals, getting position in the low post, that he was a great rebounder, that he had that high motor. It's some of the additional skill, the vision. That's something that everybody who saw Queen play in high school absolutely raved about, was his vision. And that's something that had me excited this year when you think about a Julian Reese, Derik Queen front court, because if those two guys are as good as we expect them to be, and really what we saw from Queen and what we've seen from Reese over 3 years, they are going to attract a lot of attention. They are going to draw people in, and that's going to create opportunities for them to get the ball out to shooters. We talked a lot in that first episode about Maryland's need to shoot the ball better from the outside. Well, having a guy like Queen that's going to attract attention, and having a guy like Queen who has the vision to find guys on the outside is going to create a lot of open shots, and it's going to be up to those guards to knock those shots down. But that was something that was really impressive to me, was that vision and that ball handling. So a record-setting night for Derik Queen, working on that DQ nickname, not the most exciting. What can we call him? The Blizzard Man? What's your favorite Blizzard? I think Reese's Blizzard's probably my favorite. My dad's a big black cherry guy. I know, a little weird. Not much of a chocolate man over there, but he likes the cherry, wild cherry, maybe a strawberry every now and then. I like Reese's. I think Reese's is good. Butterfinger's good. We got to work on a nickname for Derik Queen and those DQ initials. We got to do it. I think the Blizzard Man, he's putting teams in the Blizzard machine. I don't know. We'll keep working on it. It's not there yet, but I like the direction that's heading. So I'm watching this game. I'm thinking about this game in the last couple days, and I really start thinking, Derik Queen, there's so much excitement around him. But when has there been this much excitement around a Maryland freshman? Who was the last Maryland freshman to generate this much excitement after one game or even just coming into a season? I think the obvious answer here is probably Jalen Smith, another big man from Baltimore, and there was a lot of excitement around him just with his skill set. It's a guy that Maryland and Mark Turgeon had been after for a while, but the circumstances of when he came in were a little strange, right? Maryland had this really nice core of Anthony Cowan, Kevin Herter, who else was on that team? Cowan, Herter, Daryl Morcell. There was a really nice core on that team. Bruno Fernando, of course, and then they bring in Jalen Smith, and it started to seem like over the course of his freshman year, he was going to be kind of the guy that completed that roster and was able to take them to another level, because the year before, despite having this very nice core of Anthony Cowan, who I think is an all-time Terp, I would like to see his number go up in the rafters someday, and that's a discussion we can have another time, but I really would. Kevin Herter, who of course has made a very nice NBA career for himself. Bruno Fernando, who has made a nice NBA career for himself, not quite at the level of Kevin Herter, but he's still cashing those NBA paychecks. Those were guys as a core that were not able to get to an NCAA tournament in 2018. And in comes Jalen Smith, and there's a lot of excitement around him, but I think there was some hesitancy around that version of the Terps, of what they could be. And it became very evident over that course of that season that Jalen Smith and that core was very, very good. Of course, there was always questions about what their ceiling was, just like there was really throughout the Mark Turgeon tenure, or throughout the Mark Turgeon era, throughout his tenure there. But Jalen Smith had a lot of excitement, and it was evident pretty quickly that he was going to be a guy that could be a difference maker. His opening night performance, 19 points and 13 rebounds against Delaware. Pretty good himself right there. So Jalen Smith, I think, is the first guy that comes to mind. You go back a little bit before that, I think you get to Diamond Stone, another big man. He was the class of 2015, Jalen Smith the class of 2018, and I think Diamond Stone might have been a little bit more anticipated than Jalen Smith, his arrival on campus, just because of all the excitement around that Maryland team. You know, the year before, Melo Trimble had come in. The Terps finally made a tournament under Mark Turgeon. It had been 3 years of missing the tournament. They had brought this big recruiting class in. It really didn't work out the way they expected it to, and there were some questions about what his future was going to be. Could he get the job done there? And then in that 2015 season, they do make the tournament. Melo Trimble is a breakout star that season. They have him coming back. They have Des Wells coming back. Jake Layman coming back. They bring in Rashid Suleiman, the transfer from Duke. Robert Carter was coming back. The core of that team that captivated Terps fans in 2015 was all coming back. And then you add to that this big-time five-star big man where they win this recruiting battle against Wisconsin. He's a guy from Milwaukee. Wisconsin fans are bitter. And you have to remember at that time, Wisconsin was a very, very strong program. At that time, Wisconsin was coming off a Final Four appearance, in the not so distant past in 2014 and 2015. They made the Final Four. So Diamond Stone chooses to go to Maryland over a new conference foe in Wisconsin, his home state school that was coming off a back-to-back Final Four appearances, a national championship game appearance. There was a lot of excitement for Diamond Stone. So I think there was more excitement about Diamond Stone than there was about Jalen Smith coming in. And I think the excitement now that Derik Queen has played a game is probably not quite at that same level, because there's not as much excitement, I don't think, yet for this team. I mean, you have to remember that 2016 team came into the year with really Final Four bust expectations, and they didn't get there. They got to a Sweet 16. Diamond Stone didn't quite get there. He had a pretty up and down, inconsistent freshman season, his one and only season as a Terp, but he had some moments. He had I think it was a 39-point outburst against Penn State that really saved Maryland in that game, kind of single-handedly helped them win that game. But he had some down moments, including the game against Wisconsin, where he had a technical foul in that game. It was an inconsistent year for Diamond Stone and the Terps that year. But I think you'd have to go back to that year, to that point, for the last time I can find a guy that the Maryland fan base was this excited about, right? Anthony Cowan didn't have that kind of hype coming into school. Jalen Smith did, but there were some more questions about the team, kind of more similar to this season. I think it's Diamond Stone that you have to go back to. And then before that, I would say it would be Melo Trimble. Now, I always say as I think many people around my age feel, or anybody who's a diehard Terps fan, that Juan Dixon is their favorite Maryland basketball player of all time, right? It's an easy choice. He was the best player on Maryland's only national championship team. It's pretty cut and dry, right? But I also always say Steve Francis was the most exciting Maryland basketball player that I ever saw. And it was the style of play. It was the high-flying dunks. It was the way he got up and down the court. It was just a different level of excitement than anybody I'd ever really seen play basketball, especially at Maryland to that point. I was young at the time. What was that, the 99 season? So I was about 10 at the time. And he was captivating. He was a captivating guy to watch. But the excitement around Steve Francis, and it was a different era. We didn't have all the recruiting rankings. We didn't have videos of everybody who's ever put up a shot in any gym anywhere. The excitement around Steve Francis when he came out at Midnight Madness and people saw what he could do, that's the most exciting I think the Maryland fan base has ever been about an individual player. That's the most excitement I can ever remember. And Derik Queen is starting through one game to, I think, get people, certainly not to that level, but for anybody who watched that game or anybody who was at that game, and there weren't many people at that game, let's be honest, they saw something. They saw a really special player. They saw a dynamic skill set. I think they saw what this guy can be. And through one game, he, I think, has joined this exclusive club of people where there was so much hype and interest and intrigue about a guy either coming into a season or very early into the season. If Derik Queen keeps putting up games like he did in game one, the next few in non-conference play before Maryland plays Marquette in about a week, I think there's going to be a lot of people who want to see him play in person for that Marquette game. So Derik Queen, he is the story of the game for their Terps in their season opening victory. My second takeaway from this game was that Maryland's defense is as good as it's always been over the course of the Kevin Willard era. That's something that you can always hang your hat on as a Maryland fan. When you think about Maryland, you think about a Kevin Willard team, they are going to be a good defensive team. And they were in this game. They held Manhattan to just 0.68 points per possession, or 68 points per 100 possessions, which is excellent. And I was really impressed with the length, athleticism, and physicality that I saw on this team. Maryland played a lot of guys in this game, and a lot of guys who weren't here last year. A lot of new guys to this roster. But between Deshaun Harris, Smith, Jordan Geronimo, who was on the team, Tafara Gapari, who's new, a transfer from Georgia Tech, I feel like there's a lot of length and athleticism, and I think Maryland can do some interesting things defensively with those guys. Gapare is a guy who is long and athletic. He's 6'9". I don't think he's going to give you a ton. I think anything you get from him on the offensive end, and I should note he did knock down a 3 in this game, is going to kind of be a bonus for you. But he's a guy I think can really cause problems as kind of a small ball 5 or playing the 4. That was intriguing to me. Jordan Geronimo, a guy who's extraordinarily athletic, and I thought really was his best last year when he played at the 4 spot rather than the 3 spot. And that's where we saw him a lot on Monday night during the opener. Jordan Geronimo made some really athletic plays in this game. And then in the front court, we saw what Queen can do defensively. We know what Julian Reese can do defensively. I think this is a Maryland team that is going to continue to be very good defensively, but the length and athleticism of this team is something that's really intriguing to me. This game was a game for much of the first half. It was only a 3-point Terps lead at halftime, and even early into the second half. Terps pulled away a little bit in that kind of first battle, if you will, of the second half. That's what coaches love to call it. The first battle, the first war, something along those lines. I prefer segment. I'll go with segment there. But what you're talking about there is those 4 minutes between TV timeouts. And that's how a lot of coaches break up the game. And in that first segment there of the second half, Maryland was up 31-28 at halftime, and they take a 49-37 lead. Now, Manhattan scored their 37th point with 15:50 to play in the game. 15:50 to play in the game. They scored their 37th point. Maryland held Manhattan to 12 points the rest of the game. The last 15:50 of the game, Maryland held the Jaspers to just 12 points. That's really impressive. So I was impressed by Maryland's defense, and I think it will continue to be something that we see them hang their hat on because of the length and athleticism that it looks like they have on this roster. You don't want to make too much out of it after just one game, but I think that's something Kevin Willard has really proven is going to be consistent on these Maryland teams. Since he's been here, according to KenPom, they had the 32nd ranked defense in 2023. Last year, the 14th ranked defense. And this year so far, which, take with a massive grain of salt, because this is including preseason projections. This is just through one game result, the number 5 defense. Okay. So I think he has proven the defense will be there. It's the offense that has really been the question mark. And what we didn't see was Maryland shoot great again from the outside in this game. 5 of 23, just under 22% from outside the arc. But what we did see and what did impress me was a guy like Rodney Rice knocking down a couple threes. He was 2 for 5 in this game. Now, he got big minutes in the second half because Selton Miguel, who started the game, the transfer from USF, Kevin Willard said after the game that he had sprained his ankle a couple days before the game, and that's why they didn't play him really in the second half, or at all in the second half, I should say. They said he just didn't look himself. I'm paraphrasing here, but he just didn't quite look like himself in the first half, and they decided not to play him in the second half. And Rodney Rice was a guy who benefited from those minutes and from that opportunity. And I really thought Rodney Rice looked good. He took advantage of that opportunity. This is a guy who hasn't played a ton of basketball in the last 2 years, really struggled through injuries in his freshman year at Virginia Tech, but he had a big outburst in an ACC tournament game, which is something that I've been intrigued by. And then last year, he transferred in October before the season started. So he didn't play college basketball last year. This is a guy who I think will just benefit more and more from minutes. But in his minutes on Monday night, and he got a lot of them, 24, he put up 12 points. He was 2 of 5 from beyond the arc. He had a really nice drive to the basket at one point. I was impressed by Rodney Rice in this game. But Maryland still has to shoot better from 3. That's something that we're going to continue to watch all season long. And Kevin Willard, in his postgame presser after the game, said he's not really worried about it. He knows he has shooters on this team. It's something to me that's still a question mark and needs to be proven a little bit more, but I really did like what I saw from Rodney Rice in this game. So a good start overall for the Terps, I would say. You can complain in these wins if you like, and trust me, I have in the past many a time complained about how Maryland looks in a win against a team, an overmatched team in the non-conference. But ultimately, Maryland comes away with a 30-point win in this one, and there are some teams around the country that have not fared so well. Because I do think this is a new era of college basketball. We see Villanova last night go down to Columbia. Ugh. That's the kind of losses you can take early in the season, and especially in this new era of college basketball where you were turning over so much of your roster. There's so many question marks going into a season. I think these high major teams now more than ever are susceptible to taking a bad loss in the non-conference. So I'm kind of at the point where any win they get in the non-conference, you can evaluate, you can certainly criticize if you like. I'm not above it, but you can evaluate. You can try to understand where they can improve upon, but to some extent, a win's a bit of a win because there are teams all over the country going down and taking bad losses. I mean, in the Big East alone, not all of these teams lost, but on opening night, there were some games that were far too close for comfort. DePaul goes to overtime against Southern Indiana. Seton Hall scrapes by St. Peter's 57-53. Providence gets by Central Connecticut 59-55. And the SEC, South Carolina, goes down on opening night to North Florida. So, look, I am a firm believer Maryland should not ever be losing a game to a team that's above 300 in KenPom, which is what Manhattan was, that they should not be losing games to mid-majors, low majors, teams from the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference like Manhattan and their next opponent, Mount St. Mary's, but it is happening all over the country. So to see Maryland get a 30-point win on opening night, I think is really nice regardless of what the score was at halftime. Are there things you'd like to see improved? Absolutely. 3-point shooting, absolutely at the top of that list. But to get a 30-point win, to see Derik Queen in his debut play like he did, to see the skill set and the possibility with him, I thought was a great start to the season right there. Now, what's next for the Terps? A couple more cupcake games, if you will. Mount St. Mary's tomorrow night, and then Florida A&M on Monday night. Those are the 2 warm-up games left before they face their first real test, Marquette. And next week, I will talk a lot more about Marquette. I will break down that game, talk a little bit about what I expect, how Maryland can win that game, what they have to do to win that game. But the guy you need to know right now that I want to talk about a little bit is Cam Jones on Marquette. Because Marquette was a very good team a season ago. A lot of the talk about that team was about their point guard, Tyler Kolek, and for good reason. He was an excellent player, but Cam Jones was right there beside him, and on opening night for Marquette, Cam Jones puts up 32 points on 14 of 16 shooting from the field against Stony Brook. An uber-efficient performance for Cam Jones. So he's going to be a challenge for the Terps. And I think that's where some of this length and athleticism can serve Maryland well against a guy like him. It'll be interesting to see how they play him, who they throw at him. I would guess Selton Miguel, who's a guy who I think he was all defensive team a season ago in the American Athletic Conference. So you would think they would start with a guy like him, but they have a lot of options. Maybe a Deshaun Harris-Smith at some point. I don't love a guy like Jordan Geronimo playing at the 3, but maybe you put him on a Cam Jones at time, or at a minimum, it helps with switching. It helps with rotations. So I think Maryland has a lot of interesting pieces to defend a guy like Cam Jones. That's going to be one of the matchups I'm certainly watching for next week. Not going to get too much into a preview of these upcoming non-conference games here because, quite frankly, Maryland has more talent than these teams, Mount St. Mary's and Florida A&M. I don't know a ton about these teams, Mount St. Mary's and Florida A&M. So I'm not going to pretend like I do. I'm not going to pretend like I can break these teams down. The bottom line here is you want to see more of the same from the Terps like you did against Manhattan. You want to see them dominate inside against overmatched teams, and Mount St. Mary's, similar in size, I believe, to Manhattan. Just kind of going through their roster in their season opening win against not a D1 team. They didn't play a D1 team to open the season, but they did play a game so far. It was a 98-62 win over Notre Dame, Maryland. The tallest guy on their roster who played was 6'9", right? So that's another game, another team where you want to see Maryland dominate inside. You want to continue to see how Julian Reese and Derik Queen play together. They played together a lot, but they were also separated a lot. And I thought it was interesting what Kevin Willard had to say after the game about wanting to keep them separate a little bit more. Because when you play them together, that means there are chunks of the game, periods of the game, where neither of them are going to be on the court. And I think that's fair. I think when they're clearly 2 of your best 5 players, I think you want at least one of those guys on the court as often as possible. So I think that's something interesting to consider. When they were both out, it looked like, I'm trying to look back at my notes here, it was Gapare and Geronimo that were playing a lot in the front court. It was Geronimo at the 5, Gapare at the 4. And either Derik Queen or Julian Reese are much different players than both of those guys, and I think are a lot more of an offense, or I'm confident that Derik Queen or Julian Reese is a much better offensive threat than either one of those guys. It's a guy who's going to command a lot more attention. So I completely understand Willard's thought that you want to have at least one of those guys on the court at all times. Now, I think there are instances and times where it's definitely going to make sense to play them both together because of the mismatches that they command. I didn't think that one of the things you worry about with playing 2 bigs like that, and so much of basketball is going away from the 2 big lineup, is that it kind of shrinks the court. It clogs a lane. I really didn't feel that way. I didn't feel that way really at all. We'll see, especially as we get into better competition, how much of a face-up game has Julian Reese developed? How much can he shoot from the outside? We saw Derik Queen pull the trigger on a couple shots from the outside. Thought one was a pretty good shot. One was maybe a little bit ill-advised. So he has the confidence to do it. We'll see how much of a face-up game Reese has, how confident these guys are in making and taking shots from the outside, because I think it's going to be really critical when they're on the court together. If you have to at least respect the three-point line. You have to respect the fact that Julian Reese could get the ball out on the three-point line and take one and make one. I think that's a pretty big game changer for the Terps. So that's one of the things I'm going to continue to watch on Friday night, continue to watch on Monday night when they take on Florida A&M. It's Mount St. Mary's Friday. It's Florida A&M on Monday. And then the big one next Friday against Marquette. Hey, that's the show for today. Really appreciate you hanging out with me and talking Terps. I'll be back again next week to break down these next two games, Mount St. Mary's and Florida A&M, and then, of course, preview the big one against Marquette. Enjoy the games this week, everybody, and I will talk to you next week.